Okay, we are recording. So thank you again to everyone for joining me. So this is part one of my 2 professional development seminars required for my pageant duties. I know most of my audience is coming from pageantry, but along with the many pageant titles I've held over the years, I am also a registered yoga teacher, a certified integrative trauma coach, working on becoming an integrative trauma practitioner, and I am in my psychiatry residency training. So my main interest is very much in healing the mind and body when we experience traumas. So I'm talking today about when leaving is not an option, surviving narcissists in the workplace. And the reason for that topic is because narcissists can traumatize us. Now, I operate with a different definition of trauma than the current DSM in psychiatry, which is very limited to particular types of events. Outside of psychiatry's many limitations in being insufficiently trauma-informed, the definition of trauma has expanded over time. It's now seen as anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope and respond, and leaves us feeling helpless, hopeless, and out of control. Another definition of trauma is anything that was too much for too long, or too little for not long enough. And trauma is not just what happens to us, but also the impact on our mind and what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. And other than having no empathetic witnesses, trauma is what happens when the natural fight or flight response is interrupted during the event and cannot complete. So for many reasons, as we will go over during this seminar, I would say working with narcissists can be traumatic, usually a mix of complex and systemic or institutionalized trauma. So our topics today will be to clarify the meaning of narcissists, when leaving is an option, do that and why, strategies for managing and surviving the situation, caution on workplace dynamics and investigations, and creating change by outsmarting the narcissist. So first, what is narcissism? Narcissist is a very trendy term these days. Look up any celebrity and you'll find that some of their haters call them narcissists. Anyone who has ever had a bad breakup, you'll probably find at least one of their exes has suggested that they're a narcissist at some point. Calling someone a narcissist seems to be the preferred insult of the decade, just as popular as saying everything is gaslighting. And unfortunately, real narcissists love to project by accusing their victims of being narcissists. Some of you watching this talk might be here because someone accused you of being a narcissist at some point, and you wonder if you are. But that's the key. You wonder if you are. And you may feel bad about it, even traumatized by the accusation. Real narcissists are probably not going to take the time to look at a talk like this, to introspect, to seek therapy, to try to become better people. So if you're here, you're more likely to be narcissistically guarded or defended because you've been a victim of narcissistic abuse, not because you're the narcissist. But some narcissists do become self-aware and motivated to change, as we'll see on the next slide. The point I want to make here, though, is that not everyone who has ever been mean to you is a narcissist. Sometimes people don't like you for reasons that have nothing to do with narcissism. People can be self-absorbed without being narcissists. People may not be self-aware about their impact on others without being narcissists. And people can display childish behaviors when they disagree with someone or don't get their way without being narcissists. Our society is so much more polarized these days, largely influenced by social media algorithms that surround people with opinions that reinforce their ideas. And because of this polarization of society, people can't tolerate when someone disagrees with them or doesn't like them. Our triggers prevent us from seeing the other person's humanity. So as a result, the tendency among general society and even among mental health professionals is to label anyone who disagrees with you or doesn't like you as having a personality disorder. This is especially a big problem among mental health professionals who get their ego bruised by a challenging patient that they can't seem to fix. Instead of empathetically changing the approach, lots of mental health professionals get exasperated and say the person can't be fixed. There's less self-reflection on what the mental health professionals could do differently, and more an externalizing of that person is just personality disordered because I know that I am great and I am right, and any patient who thinks differently is the problem. And that attitude toward unhappy patients sure sounds like narcissism. And again, as it says on the slide, reality is much more gray. Is the narcissist all bad? Is the victim completely innocent? Is the victim the real covert narcissist, projecting the label on the narcissist who is actually the true victim? It's a little bit crazy making. So the human condition is narcissism. All humans are on the narcissism spectrum, mostly healthy narcissism. And while I'm saying that, I also want to point out that not all humans are on the autism spectrum. So some people like to say, well, everyone is a little bit autistic, and that will make the autism community mad. So autism is a minority neurotype compared with the majority allistic neurotype. It's not a spectrum that everyone is on. But narcissism is a necessary part of development to ensure children's survival. Children have a natural instinct toward narcissism, which adults even find cute. And this supports children's survival. Natural emotional and psychological maturation involves shedding some of that narcissism as people integrate into society as they grow up. But some people stay stuck at a more primitive narcissistic level, usually because they've had some kind of trauma that made them get stuck. That trauma could look like not feeling loved or having unmet basic needs, which put the developing brain in a stressed survival mode and impaired growth of the emotional part of the brain. At the core of a lot of narcissists is really a lot of pain, a lot of shame, and self-hatred related to that trauma. And that's what fuels their bad behaviors. They have learned to survive by inflating themselves on the outside, because on the inside, they are weak, insecure, and empty, because that is what trauma did to them. I actually see narcissism as a type of trauma disorder. Can people be narcissistic without having any trauma history? Sure. Do the vast majority of people who are narcissistic have trauma? Absolutely. Even the narcissistic institutions, which I'll get to later, have had some kind of trauma. For example, they may have had some very big scandals in the past, and they're traumatized by that, which is why they give you such a hard time if they see you as a problem that risks another scandal. But trauma is an explanation and not an excuse. We are not having this talk today to figure out how to heal narcissists, nor to garner sympathy for narcissists and cut them some slack. This is a very practical talk, just to talk about how to maneuver their toxic behavior, because while maturation is possible, if someone becomes self-aware and motivated, you can't control what they do, but you can control what you do. A worthwhile read on what it's like when someone has lasting emotional immaturity is Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. It's also worth noting that narcissists can contribute a lot to society. Narcissists can just be parasitic people, but they can also be important people in society. I mean, do you know how many doctors are narcissists? I used to think narcissism was just abundant in surgery, but oh no. It is abundant in all specialties. And as much as those people can be awful to be around, they still can help a lot of people. They may have really bad reviews on ratemds.com. I've never met a narcissistic doctor with good ratings on ratemds, but nonetheless, they can help a lot of people despite being rough around the edges. Think of Doctor Strange in the Marvel Universe. He was definitely not a softie before he lost his ability to do surgery. So now let's talk a little bit about narcissistic tendencies. So I'm only going to focus on your run-of-the-mill jerk narcissist today. Someone who is unpleasant to be around, who seems to be selfish and self-centered, but not someone who is evil, which would be on the more extreme end of the spectrum toward antisocial personality or psychopathy. I try to go through life seeing the humanity in everyone. I like to hope that most people are good people who maybe are just traumatized. I like to believe that there are no evil people in this world, but I did have a forensic psychiatrist mentor at one point, and she told me very clearly that from the things she has seen, there are absolutely people who are pure evil, and not everyone is a good person with a bad situation. I don't know what she has seen, but today we're going to focus on the types of people who are not so evil that they need to go to jail, just the types of people who are ruthless, selfish, arrogant, and make your life miserable at work. So as it says on the slide, narcissists are difficult people, self-important, entitled, exhausting. They're energy vampires. They need external validation to survive. They're malicious when crossed. And you just get a sense that they're not authentic. They don't feel genuine. Or they may seem wonderful on the surface to everyone except their targets. Most people may see a charming, confident, compassionate, polite person, but their targets see manipulation, abuse, coercion, gaslighting, but nobody believes them because a narcissist looks so great on the surface to everyone else. Narcissists have strong cognitive empathy, so they can easily read people and therefore manipulate them. They have weak affective or emotional empathy, so they're not able to feel another person's pain. So when people say narcissists don't have empathy, well, they don't have the kind of empathy that makes them feel other people suffering. They don't care how you feel, but they know how you feel. So almost all narcissists lie often, easily, believably, and remorselessly. They refuse to take responsibility for their actions. They lack humility. They almost never apologize, and they just find ways to justify what they did, shifting blame instead of admitting mistakes. Narcissists exist in any field, not just business or politics. Even therapists or any kind of mental health professional can be narcissists. Some people solve other people's problems to avoid working on their own. And covert narcissists can mimic empathy very convincingly, even though it's not real. The key is that all roads lead back to self. All actions and decisions are self-serving. Narcissists are brown-nosing sycophants who kiss up and kick down. They converse effortlessly with people in positions of power and authority, charming and manipulating them into discarding anyone that the narcissist has recognized as a threat. So, you. Narcissistic people, well, when we talk about narcissists, they're generally referring to the classic, grandiose, arrogant, charming type, the one who is vain, entitled, successful, superficial. They tend to have one-sided conversations. They talk a lot about themselves. They need attention and admiration, and they take undue credit for other people's work. A very well-known contrasting type is the covert narcissist, the perpetual victim, the person who says all my exes were crazy, which we should all know is a red flag as soon as someone says that. They are sensitive to perceived hostility from others. They quickly become vengeful for any criticism. They tend to project, so it's like a hostile boss labeling an unhappy employee as hostile. They get resentful for chronically feeling misunderstood or underappreciated. They're passive-aggressive, insecure, they have low self-esteem, high levels of depression. But it's important to distinguish these people from real victims. So those who have been victimized, like people who have suffered child abuse, are more likely to be drawn to re-victimizing situations, like spousal abuse. So if someone seems to always be a victim, is it because they're playing victim, because they're a covert narcissist, or is it because they're stuck in a re-victimizing pattern because of things that have happened to them in their past that they somehow are drawn to that situation again and again? Or there's something about them that makes them easy to target. And there are other types that are worth briefly mentioning. So distinctions are laid out by Dr. Ramani Durvasula. You may know her as YouTube's biggest narcissism expert. The label is less important than being able to recognize the patterns of behaviors in order to protect yourself. So malignant narcissists are like grandiose narcissists, but they are more exploitative, Machiavellian, manipulative, remorseless in their abuse of power. They tend towards psychopathy. There's also altruistic or communal narcissists, so they are all about love until you cross them. You often see this in the religious world. They're in cult leaders or even in healthcare. They claim the moral high ground with self-righteousness. They may guilt trip to emotionally entrap anyone who disagrees with them. And they're always posting online about their charitable deeds. They're seeking validation. It's important to distinguish these people from real altruists. The key is the motivation. Are they doing what they're doing to make the world a better place? Or are they just doing it to get praise, to get validation? Real altruists tend not to advertise the good things they're doing as much. You'll still see them advertising somewhat so that they raise awareness about causes that need attention, but it's not as much in your face as altruistic narcissists. And some of the other types, there's more details in Dr. Ramani's book, Don't You Know Who I Am? I won't go through all of them, but basically, I won't go through all of them in too much detail, but basically there's the neglectful type, so you only exist when they want something from you. There's benign, so this is a narcissist who may appear immature, shallow, teenager-like, they speak thoughtlessly, they lack empathy, but it's seen as cluelessness. They're entitled, but it's just seen as clumsiness. They're grandiose, but they're just seen as childlike. They make everything about themselves, but they're harmless. There's the entitled narcissist. They feel deserving of special treatment without good reason. They have temper tantrums when they don't get what they want. They won't take no for an answer. And there's generational or cultural narcissists. So families or cultures with high authoritarianism, patriarchy, strong power dynamics, and behaviors to reinforce their power while dehumanizing others as disposable. And of course, people can be a combination of different types of narcissist. So it's important that we also distinguish narcissists from autists. So that's autistic people. Autists may be genuinely intelligent, but bluntly honest. So they're perceived as arrogant, cerebral narcissists, but they do not discard or devalue someone who is less intelligent than them. They may be socially naive, and they are often victimized or rejected by society. They may appear as covert narcissists in that way because they are real victims. They may appear to lack empathy because of the double empathy problem. So that's where autists struggle to understand neurotypicals, and neurotypicals struggle to understand autists. But autists understand other autists easily. So people within the same neurotype understand each other. People within different neurotypes don't. And that's a double empathy problem. Like empathy is not going both ways when they're speaking different languages. And autists may look like they're entitled narcissists throwing tantrums over not getting what they want when they're actually having autistic meltdowns. And an autistic meltdown is when the prefrontal cortex shuts down during a painful, impulsive, difficult to control, intense emotional reaction. So the key here is that they are genuine, humble, they mean no harm, and they easily feel remorse, particularly once they find out that they have caused harm unintentionally. In fact, autists have high rates of PTSD and suicide because life in an allistic world is so hard for autistic people. But that is another talk for another time. Now let's move on to narcissistic institutions. So is your colleague a narcissistic person, or is the institution covertly narcissistic, or maybe both? So narcissistic institutions are organizations that care more about public image than employee well-being. So that could look like certain religions, certain monarchies, most of medical culture, certain universities, and so on. They prefer to hire narcissists, possible sycophants, because they won't cause problems. They'll just admire the narcissistic institution. Or they prefer to hire people who seem easy to control with no risk of challenging authority when the institution is in the wrong. These types of narcissistic institutions will selectively protect their own, particularly the narcissists, covering up wrongdoing and even manipulating investigations to be dismissed. They demonstrate aggression toward outgroups perceived as threatening, often devaluing them, discarding them, sabotaging their career. So that point about outgroups is referring to collective narcissism, which is a factor in problematic intergroup relations. So a narcissistic group is more sensitive to perceived criticism exhibited by outgroups, and is therefore more likely to retaliate. Collective narcissism is also related to negativity between groups who share a history of distressing experiences. The members of a narcissistic in-group are likely to assume threats or negativity towards their in-group where threats or negativity were not necessarily implied or exhibited. It is thought that this heightened sensitivity to negative feelings towards the in-group is a result of underlying doubts about the greatness of the in-group held by its members. A perfect example is universities that are not so lacking in prestige that they are very humble about their status in the academic world, but they fall short of the prestige of greater universities. They may have an indignant inferiority complex. That's psychological first runner-up syndrome of being more unhappy with their status than people who are fourth or fifth runner-up because they got so close to higher prestige, and that leads to feeling entitled to more but resentful about having less. Any outsider who completed an earlier degree at a more prestigious school and then begins a subsequent degree at a less prestigious school may be ostracized by long-standing students in the institution who have this unconscious inferiority bias, as they generally resent the students from the more prestigious school. This is especially the case if the less prestigious university has been traumatized by a history of scandals that lower their societal standing, because they become very vigilant to the risk of more scandals, and this leads to narcissistic, unethical behavior with evidence of a sense of entitlement, self-aggrandizement, denial, and rationalizations to justify everything the institution does. Narcissistic institutions confuse accountability with harsh consequences, so punishments with lasting negative effects that cannot be resolved, and that creates a culture of fear. They treat trust as a reward earned through performance, and this means that fearing negative consequences, employees subsequently feel compelled to hide mistakes, so everyone pretends to be perfect. They discourage healthy conflict. There's avoidance and shutting down of diverse viewpoints, and that creates a culture of groupthink, where only the prevailing ideology exists. They have top-down decision-making and ignoring team input. They don't value the insights from people lower down in the hierarchy. And they focus on individual tasks over collective goals, creating competition rather than cooperation and collaboration between colleagues. And they choose denial over truth, despite any amount of evidence of their impact. So this is an excellent article that covers toxic workplaces. It realistically points out how difficult these workplaces are to change, especially if you try internal processes, which, as this article points out, can often be rigged. It is definitely worth the read, so you would go to thewalrus.ca/toxic-work. And now let's talk about trauma-informed institutions. That is, in some ways, the opposite of a narcissistic institution because it genuinely cares about employee well-being. Though they are hard to find, this does exist. And I mean beyond the meaningless pandering about resilience. They don't just tell you to figure out how to cope with the stressors of the job. They actively work to make the job less stressful. For example, they follow the research with regard to employee health. For example, working on what work hours make sense, what kind of workplace setup makes sense. These institutions are led by several trauma-informed principles. So they create an environment of predictability, safety, and trust. They invite conflict to be addressed in a cohesive, restorative manner. They empower employees by encouraging their strengths. They provide choice and collaboration to address power imbalances. So in sum, a good trauma-informed institution is invitational, cares about choice, empowerment, agency, safety, and provides predictability. Now, could your narcissistic institution ever get there? If you have hope that it will change spontaneously, that means that you have faith in the leaders that have allowed it to become toxic. So we'll discuss real change strategies toward the end of this presentation, because how your boss acts affects your mental health. Some will give you balance, respect, and peace of mind, while others will give you burnout, insecurity, and anxiety. Your boss or direct supervisors can have a greater impact on your health than your doctor. Okay, so now I would like to invite you to our first breakout room of the session. If you don't want to join, you can refuse the invitation, but I suggest that you try it out because reflecting and building community with people like you could help you. So please take a screenshot of these questions. So you'll be in groups of 3 people per room for 15 minutes. Each of you has 5 minutes to reflect and share a brief summary of your experience with either a narcissistic colleague, boss, or a narcissistic institution. And talk about how you've identified that this person is a narcissist. Do they exhibit any key features that may mean they are not narcissistic? Could they be repeatedly re-victimized and have trauma symptoms because of that? Are they authentically altruistic and not just trying to show off about all the good that they do? Or could they be autistic and be genuinely misunderstood? So go over these ideas, and whoever it is that you're talking about who you've decided that you get the impression this person is narcissistic, that will be who we focus on in the rest of the breakout rooms. So you'll be returned to this same group to continue discussion about this particular experience later in the seminar. Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording. I can figure out how to do that. There we go. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording and then I'll start it when we come back. Okay, welcome back. So now let's talk about leaving when it's an option. The traumatic stress of working with narcissists can derail your career. It can ruin your relationships even outside of work, and it can destroy your mental health. A narcissistic boss or institution can influence the trajectory of someone's entire career and even their lives. Working in a toxic environment can change you. It can be traumatic, as we talked about in the first slide, particularly if you've been scapegoated for other people's actions. So it can change you into a different person who is grumpy, unkind, impatient, irritable, brain-fogged, and sometimes irrational. You may turn into an unprofessional person, and how to manage professional communication in stressful workplaces will be covered in my next presentation. But something to keep in mind is that we go to therapy to deal with people in our lives who won't go to therapy. Narcissists don't think there's anything wrong with them. They don't want to go to therapy. You cannot heal from a traumatic event if that event does not end. So it's important to leave if you can. But something to keep in mind is that narcissists may be lurking anywhere else. If you change your career, if you go to a different place, if you switch departments, how do you know that it'll be better there? It might be. I mean, not every place has narcissists, not every place is a narcissistic institution, but you also might come across similar people that just do things in a different way, but ultimately it's the same problem. So when you think about fear of narcissists, you can think of the word fear as an acronym of forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. So when leaving is not an option. People cannot always leave narcissists. Some people must stay for economic reasons. They just can't afford to leave. This is the golden handcuffs, where someone may be financially dependent on a job that has control over their current paycheck or their future career prospects. Maybe you know that if you leave this narcissistic situation, they will ensure you can never find a job again in that field, making it hard to leave them. Or sometimes people stay out of a sense of duty, or a distorted sense of love, like Stockholm Syndrome, where they love their captor. Or because of mental health difficulties that make it hard to envision a different life, or to be motivated to seek that better life, or to even feel deserving of that better life. Whatever your reasons for being trapped, working with narcissists, or working within a narcissistic institution, I'm not here to judge. I'm here to help you survive. So you can do that by first learning your vulnerabilities. What makes you a target? Also, learn how to identify the signs of being targeted. Learn communication and coping strategies to survive. Beware the workplace dynamics and investigations around narcissism. And be smart about creating change. We'll talk about how to outsmart narcissists at the very end. So the top narcissist targets. These are not the only types of people who can be targeted by narcissists, but they are the most likely to be targeted. So if you recognize yourself in any of this, just by being aware, you can become appropriately careful about your tendencies so you do not get entrapped by a narcissist. You can conceptualize a narcissist as a person with a love deficit disorder, an inability to feel love for others. What motivates most of humanity is love for others. That's why we do the good things we do. When narcissists lack that, they become only motivated by themselves, and they get drawn to people who are on the other side of the narcissism spectrum, those with self-love deficit disorder. So these people, they could both be coming from the same level of trauma, but one person turns that into an inability to love others, and then another person that turns into an inability to love themselves. And these two extremes attract like magnets. Usually narcissists like to prey on people with trauma in their background because they are easy targets. Maybe they have weak boundaries that allow narcissists in, or they have low self-esteem that narcissists can take advantage of for psychological abuse, or anything along those lines. So if you want to learn more about self-love deficit disorder and how to heal that, that's not something I go over in this presentation, but you can go to drtracy.tv to try her programs. So Dr. Tracy Campbell has some fantastic insights and some great programs to go over recovery from narcissistic abuse and from self-love deficit disorder. So this will involve an extended program of learning and practicing self-compassion that can lead to better well-being, better health, better body image and eating habits, more personal accountability, better coping and resilience, less burnout, and more enhanced connections with others. Because people's nervous systems will choose familiar chaos over unfamiliar peace until they heal the core wound that drives that magnetism between a person with self-love deficit disorder and narcissism. Now, another top narcissist target is autistic people. As I went over earlier, on the surface, autistic people can come across like they're narcissists. But when you dig deeper, you find out that autists are actually the polar opposite of narcissists. And this is part of why narcissists hate autistic people. Where narcissists don't think the rules apply to them and they lack morals, autists really like rules. They are highly principled about their morals, and they will bluntly call it out when someone is breaking the rules. Where narcissists may be either indifferent to hurting someone or actually do it maliciously, autists lack insight into their impact, and they feel terrible when they find out that they hurt someone. And they get really angry when they realize that narcissists don't feel any remorse for their impact. So there are many reasons along these lines why narcissists and autists tend to clash, like a criminal and a cop dynamic. And there's also the Snow White targets. So those who are better at whatever the narcissist values most. So that could be beauty, just like Snow White and the Queen, or it could be talent or intelligence, skill, popularity, whatever it is that triggers envy. And narcissist targets can be anyone who is sweet, highly empathetic, and eager to forgive, because these are fantastic traits that let them in and that are easily exploited. This yin-yang image can help to understand the magnetic attraction between narcissists and people who lack self-love, or between narcissists and autists. In both cases, it's two sides of the same coin, polar opposites leading to toxic outcomes. So how targets of narcissism get treated. There are several slides going over the types of tactics that narcissists use once they decide that someone is a target. They could devalue you. So they could be belittling achievements or twisting somebody's achievements into something bad. So you only got lucky. You didn't deserve that achievement. Oh, you only took on that extra project for attention. You have no insight into how bad this makes you look. So this kind of behavior can come from a place of envy, insecurity, or feeling threatened. They will also trauma bond. So that will involve back and forth devaluing and idealizing to create a trauma bond and make victims question their perceptions, so it's hard for them to leave. They also like to provoke their victims, intentionally triggering them with something that they know will upset them to get a bad reaction from them. This gives them a high, and it gives credibility to their eventual smear campaign. They love to blame and shame, especially for victims having a fight reaction to provocation. And they love to use the silent treatment. So that's when they punish targets by stonewalling with a cold non-response, which is very unsettling for the person on the receiving end of silent treatment and stonewalling. So it's to assert control and make targets feel powerless so that they comply later. They can also engage in gaslighting. So that is intentionally making a victim question their sanity and reality. So the perpetrator, their narcissist, knows the truth, but they want to make the victim feel crazy. Or they deny anything that makes them look bad. Not necessarily make the victim look crazy, although that is a bonus of that, but just to deny anything that can make it clear that the narcissist is not that great of a person. So it's important to point out that disagreeing because of different memories or interpretations is not gaslighting. People throw around the word gaslighting all the time. And it's too much, honestly. It kind of cheapens the word. You can disagree with someone without gaslighting them. Gaslighting is when you're intentionally trying to make somebody question their sanity or question the reality. So there's also coercive control, actions that are meant to harm, punish, or frighten the victim. That involves invading somebody's privacy by persistent monitoring and stalking, like of their social media profiles, their online activities, and using that information to exert control and manipulate situations. That can look like deliberately ruining the victim's relationships with others to isolate them. That can look like forcing the victim to become financially dependent on the narcissist, such as by threatening to destroy their career if they do not comply with certain expectations. And that can look like gaslighting, threats, intimidation, the smear campaign, all of which are creating a climate of fear. Targets can also experience insults and put-downs, so personal attacks to undermine their confidence. There's also projecting mastery, where narcissists shift blame and project their faults onto the target to divert attention from their actions and evade responsibility. There's also twisting words, so twisting what the target said to suit the narcissist's narrative. There's exaggerating, so claiming that the target's communication is angry, aggressive, and arguing, in order to avoid productively engaging with the target's attempts to get their points across and have a productive conversation. Suddenly, everything the target says is aggressive arguing. There's word salad. So that's where a narcissist deliberately speaks nonsensically to confuse the target and make the victim question their reality and their sanity. There's also humiliation, so ridiculing or derogating the target in front of others. This is especially a problem in medical culture where something called pimping, that's the casual term for when a supervising physician will question a student in front of other students or patients and just keep pushing to make them look dumb. There's also guilt trips, such as making targets feel bad for taking vacation time. There's also gossip entrapment. So that's where the narcissist may start gossiping about colleagues, and then they'll use the target's response against them, particularly if the target agrees with malicious comments, which the target might just be doing to be agreeable, but suddenly it gets turned against them. There's also designing office politics to divide the workplace and become the boss's pet. And there's also intentionally making mistakes that the target then has to fix, or the target gets blamed for the mistake. There's passive aggression, like eye rolls, sarcasm, comments like, I guess I can't do anything right. You should do it for me then. So where somebody's just not able to take accountability in a constructive way, where they become passive aggressive about even receiving criticism. There's also triangulation, so recruiting a third party to invalidate or bring down the victim, kind of ganging up on the victim, which makes it a lot harder to be in that victim's mind. There's taking credit, so claiming to achieve what the target actually achieved without the narcissist's contribution, just to cause irritation to the target and to get attention for doing something that they didn't actually do. There's also making work hard, so that's where the narcissist will withhold information that is necessary to complete tasks, or where they are not contributing to something that is expected to be shared work, and they expect the target to pick up the slack. Overall, that is just making it so much harder for the target to do their job. There's the takedown. So when a target is seen as a threat, narcissists may start doing things like CCing authority figures on emails to cause drama, so triangulation, or they may spread malicious rumors, or they may talk over targets in meetings, things to generally bring them down and bring other people into the situation. There's also false reports. So to punish the target, narcissists can have them defamed and investigated for false claims in order to take the attention off of what the narcissist did. So that can look like claiming the target did things that did not happen with no evidence, just to create chaos and avoid their own accountability. There's also ostracization. So that is excluding the target from meetings or workplace social norms like out-of-office socials that all are welcome to except the target. There is flipping the script. When the narcissist is confronted for doing something wrong, they turn the conversation into being about how unprofessional the target is for raising the issue. How dare you call me out? Don't you know where you are in the hierarchy? There's also pulling rank. So I basically just went over that. So that's especially if the narcissist is a supervisor or boss. They affirm their title, they affirm the target's lower rank to shut down any questioning of authority. They don't remember leadership is a privilege that not everyone deserves. And unfortunately, if a narcissist gets that privilege, they can misuse it in abuses of power. They can marginalize employees, especially if they are people who challenge a supervisor or boss. They become easily dismissed, ignored, excluded from important conversations that everyone else is invited to. Even when they make decisions on the target's behalf, they'll do that while fully disregarding their input. There's the prove it again bias. So that is where targets are required to prove their character or their worth repeatedly, even if it has already been proven previously. There's micromanaging, so reducing the target's sense of autonomy in decisions. There is also the constructive dismissal. So narcissistic bosses and narcissistic institutions are very guilty of this, where they create a hostile environment to try to force resignation. They set an employee up for failure. For example, they may not set clear expectations. They may be vague. So it's possible to get angry at the employee for not doing it right, no matter what they do. Because when the expectations are vague, you can find a way to be mad about it. They may give negative feedback without support. So that creates a culture of fear and low confidence because the employee doesn't know when are they going to get negative feedback again, what's going to happen with that. Nothing ever seems to be good enough. They may hold targets back. So that can look like withholding promotions or desired projects, especially by assigning meaningless busy work to hold targets back from better opportunities. They may marginalize or isolate an employee. So that could look like stripping an employee of their ability to contribute and their sense of meaning and purpose in their work. And they may just do other things that they can think of to make working conditions intolerable. They abuse their power to coerce resignation by doing things that they know will cause great distress to the employee. There can be inconsistent and unrealistic expectations. So the target has to be perfect, but other colleagues don't need to be perfect. And there's clear favoritism. And, Bob can get away with this, but I can't get away with doing things that are better than what Bob did. There's constant criticism. So the target can do something better than colleagues who seem to have immunity, but the narcissist will find anything to criticize about their target, even when the target isn't doing anything wrong or is doing things that other employees did or is behaving better than other employees. There is scapegoating. So the most obedient employee is the golden child. But if the target decides to question the narcissist, then that person is scapegoated as being maybe not a team player or having problems with authority or anything like that, just for having valid questions of the narcissist's actions. Narcissists may talk in circles, so they deflect to avoid responsibility or to resolve conflict. You see this a lot in politics where politicians can be asked direct questions and they will not answer the question. They will just talk in circles. There can be interruptions. So narcissists may interrupt persistently to prevent their targets from expressing their thoughts fully, or to prevent their targets from completing whatever task it is that they're trying to complete. So the narcissist is able to dominate the conversation. This is something that especially happens to women. Women do get interrupted more than men. There has been some research on that, but it can happen to anyone who is the target of narcissistic abuse. And there's emotional outbursts, like unleashing narcissistic rage in any kind of way in order to intimidate the target. And that's different from somebody having an emotional outburst because they're just upset and they can't hold it in anymore. Lots of people bottle things up in workplaces, and when you bottle things up and you can't release it in a healthy way, sometimes you just explode. That is different from someone unleashing emotional outbursts on purpose to intimidate. Not having the ability to regulate your emotions versus trying to intimidate people with your emotions are two separate things. So communication with narcissists. The best thing you can do is go no contact. So that means you do not initiate contact. You do not respond to their contact. So that means you don't play their game of praise or provoke. They want you to either praise them, or if you won't, they will provoke you so they can enjoy your frustration. But you cannot defeat your enemies. You cannot defeat your demons if you are still enjoying their company. Every time you re-engage with narcissists, you are resetting your healing clock. Some demons are not meant to be fought head-on, but simply avoided. But if you cannot go 100% no contact, you can go gray rock on them. So that is where you limit communication to the bare minimum. You do not share about your personal life, your emotions, your vulnerabilities. Be boring. Comments stay neutral, like noted. Don't share your real reactions. Don't share good news. Don't share bad news. Remember that silence can never be misquoted and used against you. But the more you give a narcissist, the more ammo they have to use against you later. And if you are confronting them about something they did, which is not recommended unless you plan ahead of time and know what you're doing, be very careful about how you say anything, because they will take any opportunity to flip the script such that they become the victim to your reaction, which enables them to erase their initial action. So instead of telling them how they hurt you, flip the script on them and flip the script on the change that you're seeking by showing them how it will benefit them to do something differently, okay? Because they lack the empathy needed to care about their impact on you. And they only care about how their choices or actions impact their life, their reputation, or their success. Don't bother even trying to argue about who's right. Even if you are right, they don't care, and they might just enjoy the battle. Even if they've hurt you a lot, they don't care. What they care about is how whatever change will make their life better, not yours. So trauma responses include fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. Any person can utilize any of those at different times in their life, but everyone has a response that is primary. A very common trauma response, especially among certain types of people, like those on the spectrum, is to over-explain or overshare. It's the trauma response of ruminating on what your abuser has done to you when you're unable to process and release it. Some people say oversharing is a fight reaction when it's done aggressively, but most would say that it's more accurate to call oversharing a type of fawning reaction, where you're trying to appease the abuser, have them humanize you, have them understand you, and therefore treat you better. This may look like pleading with your abuser, telling them their impact on you, and asking them to change. So this may work with normal, empathetic human beings who did not realize their impact, and they feel remorseful once you let them know. This does not work with narcissistic people or narcissistic institutions. They have strong cognitive empathy and they can read you, so they probably already know their impact on you. But they have weak affective empathy and they do not feel your pain, even when you show it with your tears on your face and your blood on the floor. You do not need an apology to validate your feelings, so don't get caught up in trying to make them understand. They know they're hurting you and they do not care. You do not need a confession to know that your feelings are valid. Narcissists, whether that is a colleague, a supervisor, a boss, or an institution, they don't care about your feelings. If you show them your tears, they don't soften and change their ways. In fact, if you show them how much they hurt you, they might even enjoy it in a sadistic way and keep it up intentionally. You could just be giving them information on how to get under your skin. So it is not beneficial to show your pain to a narcissistic person or entity. That is not how you gain their respect or have them change the way they treat you. So stop trying to communicate with someone who sees nothing wrong in their actions, and most importantly, does not care. Get off that hamster wheel of repetitive, compulsive oversharing, hoping something you say will get through to them. The sooner you learn that narcissists do not care about how you feel, they do not care if you even live or die, and they might even enjoy seeing you suffer, the sooner you can stop embarrassing yourself with this futile oversharing and instead switch over to more effective strategies. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying this because I care enough to be real with you about what works and what doesn't work. So here's a quote about narcissism. The narcissist treats you badly, makes you respond, and then blames you for being abusive when you react. So be cautious with how you respond. That brings us to the next slide, reactive abuse in a nutshell. Sometimes people behave very badly in response to the way a narcissist treats them. This is called reactive abuse. It is out of character behavior that makes the target feel guilty for what they just did. It makes the target question if they really are the problem because they just behaved abusively. And it gives credibility to the narcissist's claims that the target is the problem, even though the narcissist was proactively provoking the situation and the target emotionally reacted. So you can think of reactive abuse in a nutshell like this. If someone steps on your toes, you ask them to stop. They do it again. You ask them to stop again. They do it again harder. You yell at them to stop. They do it again, and now your feet are bleeding, and you start screaming insults and profanities. So narcissists expect you to tolerate behavior that they could never tolerate. They couldn't handle somebody stepping on their toes. They'd be screaming from the beginning. But when you do it, they blame shift. They call you abusive. They claim that they're afraid of you. Meanwhile, your toes have been broken into a million bone fragments, but all anyone sees is the insults and profanities that you screamed. Nobody understands your perspective, least of all the one who broke your toes. And that is super unfair. And as Viktor Frankl said, an abnormal response to an abnormal situation is normal. So your reactive abuse is understandable, but people feel terrible when they do this. When targets engage in reactive abuse, it really gets to them what they've done. So a big red flag for narcissism is when you realize that you have never been misunderstood as much as you are by this person, group, or institution that seems to repeatedly misunderstand you. Could be that prove it again bias, where you have to prove yourself over and over again. Now, you may be defensive because you're ashamed of your behavior, leading to this over-explaining, fawning reaction that I mentioned. You may be defensive because you identify with your behavior, and you think that you are defined by what you've done, especially because narcissists love to malign your character for your reaction. So you feel a need to defend or justify everything you do, but you are not your behavior. There is no need to identify with it. You can acknowledge and take accountability for the mistakes you've made and see it as a temporary product of your environment and let it go. You can release that guilt. You may over-explain because you're afraid of invalidation, since that's what you've been conditioned to expect in this environment. But you do not need any of these people to understand you in order for their impacts to be valid. They hurt you. That led to a reaction from you. That is valid. You know that is valid, or you wouldn't be trying to explain why your reaction is valid. And that is enough. You know it. You can't make someone appreciate or understand you by giving them more of what they already don't appreciate. So get comfortable with people willfully misunderstanding you. Sometimes creating chaos and confusion via willful ignorance and misunderstanding or gaslighting you is how they take control over your mind. It fuels them. So take the loss, let them have it, starve them of the emotional violence that they feed on by not over-explaining yourself in that fawning trauma response. Narcissists can shatter a victim's sense of self, and over-explaining can become a way to rebuild and reclaim a fragmented identity amid self-doubt, holding on to a perfectionistic desire to see oneself as a good person. But there is so much peace and power involved in learning to let people be wrong about you. Don't give them the power of you worrying about what they think of you. What they think does not matter. Observe. Don't absorb. Just walk away to maintain your peace and heal your nervous system. Your sense of self will come back, but not through over-explaining to people who don't care about their impact on you. At the end of the day, your boss is not your friend. Your supervisors and colleagues are probably not your friends either. Everyone's just there to get a job done so they can get a paycheck. And their impact on you only matters to them if it impacts them, such as hurting their reputation. So here are some things you can say to shut them down. So first, I want to say don't bother trying to get a narcissistic boss's approval. And I know this is hard and it hurts a lot, especially for people with childhood parenting wounds. But your boss has committed to seeing you as inferior or problematic in some way, and you can't make anyone see your value. Your boss has shown you who they are. Believe them. Let go of the idea of who they could be and accept who they have shown themselves to be. A boss who doesn't see you as you are is emotionally unavailable to you, and your role is not to chase your unavailable boss for approval. Do your job as best you can and detach from expecting the narcissist to be happy with you. So some things you can say to shut them down is things like, you're committed to misunderstanding me, so I won't explain myself. I can accept that is your perception of me. Let's agree to disagree. I have no rights to control how you see me. Or I guess I have to accept how you feel. So sometimes letting someone create a false narrative of you is a small price to pay for having rid yourself of their toxicity. Let them say what they want while you go on living your lives without letting them live rent-free in your mind. Your mind is too precious for someone to be living there without earning that right. And a bonus is that you not caring about what the narcissist thinks or says about you is the best revenge. The best revenge is living well despite what they did to you and seeing them as an insignificant chapter in your life. They probably hate the fact that they can't get to you. So think of this quote, "The peace I feel without your presence in my life is worth being the villain in your story. And the most important decision you make is to be in a good mood." So now we'll talk about some survival strategies for coping with a workplace narcissist. So be aware of the signs of narcissism that this person or workplace exhibits. and put on a fire suit prior to interactions. So that is a protective emotional layer with your guard up. You create emotional space between them and you. Their fire only burns you when you let your guard down and there is an opening in the suit. Taking things personally does not serve you. And really, what narcissists do is more a reflection of who they are than of your worth. So don't let a toxic work environment diminish the way you see your value or worth. Now, people who have suffered trauma as a result of narcissists can develop post-traumatic stress disorder, or as some people call it, post-narcissistic stress disorder. And part of that can look like hypervigilance. That could look like becoming terrified of all people, being on your guard with all people at all times, and being unable to build healthy and loving connections just in case narcissistic abuse happens again. I do not want that for you, and you will not live a happy life if you let the narcissist continue to have so much power over you that you stay stuck in hypervigilance for years. What you do need to have is healthy, aware vigilance, not hypervigilance, okay? So the fire alarm does not go off in your building every time a person walks by. The fire alarm only goes off when there's smoke. So you need to practice recognizing when there is smoke and when there isn't. When you do see smoke, you put your fire suit on. The rest of the time, you go about your business. So don't go into any interactions expecting normal behavior or empathy from narcissists, as they are not capable of it. Accept them for who they have shown you that they are. Release your attachments to expected outcomes purely on the basis of shared humanity. You do not have shared humanity with narcissists. You feel empathy, they don't. Know that nothing they do is about you. It is not personal. They would do the exact same things to anyone else who presents an opening in the fire suit. You may have vulnerabilities that you need to be aware of, like self-love deficit disorder, or you may be better at something that they value, or you may be on the autism spectrum. But those things are things that present vulnerabilities, openings in your fire suit. That doesn't mean that it's something wrong with you. It is not personal. Narcissists will target anyone, even someone who isn't on the autism spectrum, someone who isn't better than them at something, someone who doesn't have self-love deficit disorder. They'll target whoever they can. So narcissists destructively target people when they feel invisible and they need attention. They can fuel their needs for attention by hurting their targets. A strategy you can use is to get ahead of this. Reverse fuel. So that means that you do play their game of praise or provoke. But you do that by studying them and getting ahead of them, seeking fuel. You give them just enough attention to settle them without going overboard so that they come to you for dopamine hits more often than you want. You just get a good read on when they need attention, and you make it constructive with simple, supportive, positive comments. Just like, oh, are you okay? Is there something I can get for you today? You look nice today. Wow, congratulations on that thing. Hey, boss, have I ever told you that I appreciate your leadership? Just something small to catch them when you see that something's wrong and they might be headed up towards that targeting somebody. Catch them before they get there and diffuse it. If you start feeding a narcissist's need for attention and admiration, not from a place of subservience or brown-nosing, but from an authentic place of looking for the silver lining on a cloud, so you can diffuse negative energy, then they will get their fuel in a positive way and not become destructive. So you can protect yourself by being on their team. Even the worst narcissist, if they have a job in the workplace, there must be something that they're doing right. So you can find that silver lining of the cloud. Narcissists have a tendency toward black and white thinking. So you're either their helper or their enemy. You're unlikely to be seen as a neutral figure unless they don't really have much contact with you at all. So decide which team you want to be on. Now, reverse fueling may feel inauthentic, fake, and demeaning. Remember, this person is stuck in a normal developmental state that all children pass through. They just never developed to a healthy adult state of narcissism with a combination of humility and compassion for others. They are the embodiment of the Greek myth of Narcissus, the one who became so in love with nothing but his own reflection in a pool of water. And that was a curse that kept him stuck in one place. So the way that myth goes is Narcissus became stuck looking at his reflection in a pool of water, and he turned into the narcissus flower, and he's just stayed there. So these people are stuck in this sense of all roads lead back to self. So when you are reverse fueling someone, you are essentially telling a child that their drawing is wonderful, even if it isn't, just to keep them calm and make a child smile. If you see them as a stuck inner child in an adult body because of whatever happened to them that traumatized them, it's even possible to feel compassion. But if you're feeling that compassion, do it with your fire suit on. As emotionally stunted as this person may be, as sad as that may be, and as much as we all want to make children feel good about themselves, you also know that this is an adult who has a lot more power than a child, and you know what this person is capable of. So you want to diffuse and contain their energy, but you do not want to give them any openings to burn you. Some uncomfortable truths are that narcissists tend to be more successful professionally. They are more represented in leadership roles, especially in capitalistic societies that favor outcomes over the process. These societies that say the ends justify the means. Now, third parties may claim to maintain neutrality in workplaces that have narcissists, but they have unconscious biases. There's attribution error, so your reactive abuse is seen as a sign of your bad character instead of a product of your environment. There is affinity bias, so they tend to side with the person they've known longer, or who has more seniority or prestige, even when that person is in the wrong. And there's the prove it again bias. I've mentioned this a couple times before. So you can prove what happened. You can prove your good character, but somehow it doesn't stick, and it needs to be proven repeatedly. Notice that the narcissist doesn't need to prove themselves repeatedly, but the target has to prove themselves repeatedly. And there are lots of other biases that exist. You can find all sorts of them and see examples of them in pretty much any workplace. So you can go to yourlogicalfallacyis.com or yourbias.is to see some more. Basically, the point is that colleagues, supervisors, bosses, they may believe the narcissist to varying degrees. That is just a fact of internal workplace dynamics around narcissists. So, if you identify a narcissist in the workplace, my first recommendation is do not tell them you are onto them. You will become a target, and I can tell you my story to explain why I suggest not confronting them. So when I started a new job several years ago, there was a very clear narcissist in my cohort. She felt like a very inauthentic person to me whenever she played victim. And she also overtly lied and took credit for things that I had done right. And she was generally arrogant. She spoke down to me as if she thought I was stupid or beneath her, when I felt very much like we were equals. And she had some nerve talking to me like that. That's how I felt. So to make matters more frustrating, she would brag about the most uninspiring achievements, and other people around me praised her excessively for the smallest things, just like adults go over the top when they tell a little kid that their stick drawing is incredible. I didn't get it. What's the big deal? Why are they praising her so much when she's just an average person who doesn't feel like anything special, and she's actually kind of fake and dishonest and unpleasant to be around? What are these blind people around me seeing that I'm not? I didn't realize that they were instinctually placating her, unconsciously reverse fueling her to keep that narcissistic energy contained in a positive way. I was the blind one. They automatically knew how to do what I needed someone to teach me manually. Unfortunately, since I didn't get it, I got tired of all the nonsense around her pretty quick. I stood up to her, I put her in her place about how she spoke to me, and she did not like it. I will spare you the details, but when she began ostracizing me, and I asked my boss for help, he said he needed to stay out of it. And so first I did try to sort it out between me and her, but she stonewalled, of course. She refused to talk to me. She gave me the silent treatment. So when I asked my boss for help and he said that he needed to stay out of it, I said I was thinking of filing a harassment complaint. And he warned me that could make things worse. He told me not to do it. Which on the one hand is a really terrible attitude to have, because processes like harassment complaints should exist purely for the benefit of the complainant. There shouldn't be a fear of retaliation. But he was right. And I've always wondered since then if he was right because he recognized her as a narcissist and he knew that retaliation could follow. Although I did not pursue a harassment complaint right away, I informally spoke to the workplace's human rights office about her behavior, and I asked for mediation. This narcissist declined mediation, and the human rights office couldn't pursue it any further without a formal complaint from me. I held back from making any kind of formal complaint in order to avoid making matters worse, like my boss warned. Unfortunately, I had already done enough, even if it wasn't formal. So that's why, months later, the narcissist found all sorts of ways to attack. She was not following me on social media, but she still invaded my privacy, spied on me, took my social media posts out of context to get me in trouble. She pretended she was afraid of me, even though I had asked for restorative mediation repeatedly, and she had declined repeatedly. She tried to sabotage my career. She slandered me. She claimed to our boss that I had made anti-Semitic posts on social media with zero proof because I did no such thing. And to top it all off, she made a harassment complaint about me, and it was filled with unprovable lies and exaggerations. All I did was have the Human Rights Office informally speak to her. All I did was stand up to her informally. But my boss warned me not to do anything, basically to just take it quietly. And when I did anything at all to stand up to her, the narcissist tried to do everything in her power to destroy me. Thankfully, I am capable of defending myself. I launched a counter complaint, I called out all her lies, and that made her back down, such that we did end up having a mediation. But I still felt that the mediation was unsatisfying, because she never once showed remorse, even several years later. Even when people told me they think she has demonstrated personal growth. Nobody ever held her accountable to showing remorse for her actions of narcissistic abuse. Years later, I've never had that closure, and I don't think I ever will have the closure of seeing remorse or an apology from her. And the way the institution handled it felt biased toward her from start to finish. And that could be because I think the institution itself has some narcissistic tendencies. I definitely saw bias against me because I stood up to her instead of keeping the peace. It was clear to me that there were signs of attribution error against me, affinity bias toward her because she had been with the institution longer, and the prove it again bias, where I was held to a higher threshold of needing to prove myself again and again in response to heightened scrutiny of me. So what I learned from that, though, is to not call out narcissists without a lot of power and ammo, because they will find ammo to use against you, even if they have to fake it, and they will try to destroy you. I ran into similar incidences a couple years later with a narcissistic supervisor, and shortly after with a narcissistic personal therapist. Every single time, I made the mistake of standing up to people who expected me to be completely deferential to them, to brown nose, to admire. My problem is that I only want to admire people who demonstrate something worth authentically admiring. I don't want to stroke the egos of unremarkable narcissists. But they expect admiration nonetheless. And they expect deference even for their exaggerated abilities and accomplishments. So remember that. And remember my boss's comment that I should not initiate any kind of action against a narcissist because, quote, it could make things worse, end quote. Remember what I said at the end of the last slide. See these people as stuck in a childhood state. And you are better off saying, good job, you did so well, like you do to a child, rather than being frank with them that they are nothing special and you don't really like them. They feel special and they feel entitled to being treated as such. And honestly, sometimes it's better to just pick your battles, like when you don't want a child to throw a tantrum. So you just let them have the lollipop that they're demanding, because at the end of the day, it's not worth the headache over the little stuff. Now, hierarchies are important to narcissists, even if they are imaginary. So if a narcissist thinks they are above you, be smart by being deferential, or else. So I do a lot of volunteer mentorship with medical students in Canada, in the United States, and internationally. And something I've noticed a lot, especially with the newer generation of medical students, is a tendency toward wanting to do crusades for justice. And I have a strong sense of justice myself, so I want to support this. But the key is that a lot of workplaces are very hierarchical. The type of person who irritates narcissists the most is the type of person who doesn't care about hierarchies, like autistic people. Everyone who is below the hierarchy of an autist loves autists because they get treated like an equal by someone who is above them. Everyone who is above the hierarchy of an autist hates autists because they're being treated as an equal by someone who is beneath them. Which that can be a breath of fresh air to someone who is a genuine person with power, who is tired of the sycophants, who appreciates someone treating them like an equal, even if that person is beneath them. But that is insulting to narcissists. They know that you're beneath them, or they see you as beneath them, and they expect that you will show deference to them. So if you identify a narcissist who has any reason to believe that they are at least your equal on the hierarchy or higher, it is not beneficial to crusade for justice against them. Why? Because you simply don't have the level of power needed to enact change at this point. especially if you're beneath them or they're equal on the hierarchy. This is why I tell medical trainees to learn from my mistakes and keep your head down and keep to yourself when you're in medical training. You can make mental note of the abuses you experience. You can come back to it and do something about it when you are independently licensed and have more power. You can circle back to change the system so narcissistic abuse of people lower on the hierarchy does not continue. But don't bother crusading for justice when you're low on the hierarchy. I have seen multiple medical students all over the world suffer the consequences of becoming a target when they begin that crusade. Most likely, someone with a strong sense of justice is a kind-hearted person who believes in a fair world. And most likely, a narcissist knows the world is not fair and knows exactly how to play the system to make their victims suffer for trying to crusade against them. They know the games of plausible deniability, of playing the sycophant and cozying up to people in authority to get them on their side, of smear campaigns and everything else. Don't pick a justice battle with a narcissistic person or a narcissistic institution, because they will undoubtedly be better at the fight than you. If you can't bring yourself to reverse fuel the narcissist because it just feels so fake and demeaning to give insincere praise, if you really want justice instead, then you have to study the narcissist and plan your strategy before you take on a narcissist. If we want to create a world where narcissists cannot get away with destroying people who offend them, we have to be smart about it. And that means not letting yourself be destroyed when you are low on a hierarchy before you have the power to change the system that enables their dishonest behavior. Wait until you progress in your career and have more power. So now we come down to the DARVO. So that's where narcissists are basically saying, I hurt you, but you told everyone about it, so now I'm the victim. So if you confront a narcissist head-on, be prepared for their DARVO tactics. DARVO stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. So deny, they will lie and gaslight, committing to their act until the very end. Only concrete evidence can maybe make them concede. But some will continue to lie even once they've been caught. For example, they may say something like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. Or they may say, oh, that is fabricated evidence. Or they may continue to lie even when they know they're lying, we know they're lying, they know that we know they're lying. It doesn't make any logical sense, but they're still lying. They just can't let it go. They're just pathological liars. They may attack. So that is the smear campaign, bringing your abilities into question, weaponizing mental health if they can, defaming you, and occasionally direct verbal or physical attacks. And the reverse victim and offender. So suddenly you're the problem. You're the narcissist. They are afraid of you, or they're feeling attacked by you. So the smear campaign, it persists. So how can you tell who the real victim is if you're on the outside of this interaction between two people who are having conflict? Well, real victims are often the ones who are more isolated. They have developed health issues. It could be physical health or mental health difficulties like depression, anxiety, or PTSD. They are deeply affected by what has happened to them, and they are seeking therapy if they can afford it. Narcissists' lives tend to be less impacted. They often don't seek therapy because they tend not to think that anything's wrong with them. They tend not to be as fazed by what has happened because they're not the real victim. And they blame victims with comments like, she brought this on herself, or she's crazy. They play victim to deflect blame, garner sympathy, and manipulate those around them. Abusers do not abuse everyone they come into contact with. Otherwise, they would not get very far in life. Abusers don't just groom their victims, they also groom the people around them to believe that the abuser is great, so that the victims look crazy or unstable for having a problem with them. It is so frustrating to know how terrible and fake a person is, yet everyone loves them because they put on a good show and they seem like an upstanding member of the community. This makes it so much harder for the real victim to be believed, and the real victim often has less support because narcissists purposely isolate them. It's important for us to recognize real victims compared to narcissists playing the victim in order to empower those who have been genuinely victimized to recognize manipulation tactics, get appropriate support, and advocate for themselves. Allies and supporters also need to know the complexities of narcissistic abuse in order to validate and support victims' realities. So these are some great relevant readings. I would suggest taking a screenshot of these links. Yeah, the point is that these are things to pay attention to. Defamation and DARVO. Abusers love to weaponize mental health, and institutions, especially in medicine, they have a role in medical misconduct that should not be ignored. Okay, so I'm tired of talking, so you will be sent to breakout rooms of 3 people per room for, that's just 10 minutes, but I mean for that to say 15 minutes. So I invite you to join the second breakout room. It will be the same 3 people as before. For those of you who didn't join the first time, if you want to join a breakout room now, please drop a comment in the Zoom chat and I will find a spot for you. So please take a screenshot of these questions. So each person has 5 minutes to reflect and share on the questions of what makes you a target? What communication strategies will you incorporate? What coping strategies will you adopt to survive? And what risky dynamics have you noticed around your workplace narcissist? Things to keep in mind, things to be wary about. So again, 5 minutes per person, so it's 15 minutes, not 10, and you'll be returned to this same group to continue discussion about this particular experience later in the seminar. Okay, now I can pause the recording. Okay, welcome back. I'll just give people a few moments here to come back into the room. So now we're going to talk about creating change, outsmarting the narcissist. For dramatic effect, I have Taylor Swift playing. So, if you want to learn how to play them like a violin, you need to know that when narcissists are on the attack, their #1 weapon is plausible deniability. When they are on the attack, they are clever and calculated in everything they do. They know how to manipulate people into seeing you as crazy, or dangerous, or stupid, or whatever their goal is in order to discredit you to save themselves from getting in trouble for whatever they did wrong. They know that they should have sensitive conversations in person. They know that they should keep written documentation looking innocent, so they have plausible deniability about whatever really transpired. They do whatever they can do to make you look like you're unreasonably suspicious. Maybe you're having persecutory delusions, or maybe you have a personality disorder. Whatever it is, they want everyone around you to doubt you and see you as crazy. They wield plausible deniability as their best weapon. They have found a way to convince everyone else that you're the problem. And this is crazy making for you because you know what your reality is, but you just can't prove it. Or can you? Your best weapon is concrete proof that overturns their plausible deniability. To catch a wolf in sheep's clothing, you have to think like a wolf, not like a sheep. As soon as you identify that someone is a narcissist or you're working in a narcissistic institution, your most important job is to start recording everything. Just a simple audio recording app on your phone will do. And I'm going to emphasize this. I have never regretted recording anyone. Ever. My only regrets have been the conversations I didn't record. But if I felt the gut instinct that I should record conversations, it has always been useful eventually. So do it. Record everything within the limits of the laws in your area. Consider restrictions around confidentiality. For example, I would never record any patients at all. In Canada, I am also legally prevented from recording conversations that I am not a part of. So eavesdropping is not okay. But if you're part of the conversation, you can record freely. Check if you need consent to record people. In Canada, you do not. If you don't need people's consent to record them, don't even tell them that you're doing it. That will just make them vigilant, angry, spiteful, and they'll be careful to be on their best behavior. You don't want them on their best behavior. You want them to reveal who they really are. So follow the laws in your area and record everything you can. Now, when you've decided to pursue justice, stay with a formal complaint or a lawsuit, make your allegations without proof initially. Let them lie and let them paint themselves into a corner, particularly if there is an opportunity for them to lie under oath, perjury. Even when you may have initiated internal workplace investigations, external investigations, or even early on at the start of formal proceedings like lawsuits, keep what you have under wraps as much as possible so you give them opportunities to tell as many lies as they think they can get away with. Wait until the last possible moment when you're legally able to add something to the evidence, and that's when you get them. To maximize the punitive damages or the criminal charges by catching them lying when they initially think it's only your word against theirs. Let them think that. Hold on to your evidence for years if you need to. And when you do begin that pursuit for justice, remember to always pay attention to who is paying the bill. If the company is paying the complaint resolution offices, they could just be a symbol of justice for legal requirements, for accreditation requirements, for good PR, and they might not do anything. If the company is paying HR, then HR probably has their hands tied. It may even feel a conscious or unconscious pressure to side with the employer. If the company is paying the investigator, then the investigator may be limited in only investigating a narrow scope defined by the employer, or may only be allowed to interview the witnesses that the employer allows, or the witnesses may be compromised by the company preemptively engaging the witnesses in meetings to ask what they know, to influence them to believe things will change, perhaps to subtly bribe them or threaten them to respond in an investigation in a way that makes the company look good. At the end of the day, the vast majority of human beings care a lot more about keeping their paycheck that lets them survive or support their family, rather than about justice. Whoever holds the money holds someone's survival in their hands. And when people are in a survival mentality, truth and justice come secondary. Even colleagues in your workplace who you thought were your friend, they side with whoever helps them take care of their family. It is awful that this is the way the world works, but it is what it is, and the smartest thing you can do is know how to play the game of narcissists right. Even the most naive person needs to understand that although the system likes to say that retaliation for assisting a complainant is prohibited, retaliation happens all the time toward complainants and their allies, and most people don't want to take that risk for you. Look at who pays the paychecks and seek your justice outside of the influence of money. So where to release your evidence to be most effective would be in external investigations, like human rights tribunals or employment tribunals, legal processes like suing a court, news media, particularly investigative journalism, and, as a last resort, social media, because the court of public opinion can be a strong ally in putting pressure on the necessary bodies to force positive change to materialize. So this is our final breakout room with the same little community you've been building today. So please take a screenshot of these questions. Each of you will have 5 minutes to reflect and share. Is your workplace narcissism situation just a nuisance, or do you need justice? What opportunities do you have to collect evidence? What are your limitations? Which avenue will you use to share your evidence? When? What are the risks? And is this worth the stress, the risks, the time commitment? Or is it more important to you to keep the peace, use some of the other strategies, maintain your mental health quietly without justice? It's really up to you to decide. I am not here to influence that. I'm just here to give you the tools so that whatever you choose to do, you have support, and now you have a little community that you can turn to if you need to. And now you've learned a few things that I hope will help you. So the breakout rooms will be left open for 15 minutes, then the Zoom will be closed. We won't be coming back to the main room. So good luck to everyone with your workplace narcissists. May the odds be ever in your favor. And because I'm tired of talking and it's been a long day for all of us, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me through my private contact form on my website for questions or coaching requests. Okay, thank you.